I stood there, squinting under the blinding Colorado sun, staring at the empty spot where our car had been just 10 minutes ago. My wife, Chloe, and her friends, Ella, Stephanie, and Lauren, were gone. At first, I thought it was another one of their stupid pranks. They were always pushing boundaries, testing how much I could take before I snapped. 5 years of marriage, and I'd grown used to their little games, the way they'd laugh at me, the way Chloe would join in instead of standing up for me. But this felt different. My phone was still plugged into the car charger. My wallet was tucked in the glove box. All I had was the faded t-shirt and jeans I was wearing, and a growing pit in my stomach as the minutes ticked by. We'd been on this road trip to Stephanie's lake house for 3 days now, and I'd been miserable the whole time. Chloe had begged me to come, saying it would be a chance to bond with her crew. I wasn't big on the idea. Her friends always treated me like an outsider, tossing out jabs and inside jokes I wasn't part of. But I went anyway because I loved her. Or at least, I thought I did. The gas station was in the middle of nowhere, just a dusty little stop off the highway with a flickering sign and a single pump. I'd gone inside to use the bathroom, figuring they'd wait. They always waited, except this time, they didn't. An hour passed. I paced the cracked pavement, kicking pebbles, telling myself they'd come back any second, tires crunching gravel, Chloe's voice calling out, "Gotcha." But the road stayed quiet. 2 hours in, sweat was dripping down my neck, and my throat was dry. I kept replaying the last few days in my head, the way Stephanie smirked when she accidentally spilled coffee on my lap, how Lauren whispered something to Chloe that made her giggle while glancing at me. I should have seen it coming. They'd been building up to something, and I'd been too dumb to notice. A truck pulled up, its engine rumbling loud enough to shake me out of my thoughts. The driver, a big guy with a gray beard and a stained ball cap, leaned out the window. "You okay, buddy?" Been standing there a while. His voice was rough but kind, and it hit me like a punch. I wasn't okay. They weren't coming back. Chloe wasn't coming back. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, my ride left me. You think you could help?" He nodded, like it wasn't the first time he'd seen someone stranded out here. "Hop in. Where you headed?" I didn't even know. Home? Back to Chloe? The life we built? But as I climbed into the cab, something shifted inside me. 5 years of her laughing at me, brushing me off, letting her friends treat me like garbage. It all came rushing up, hot and heavy. I stared out the window as the gas station shrank in the side mirror. The trucker didn't ask too many questions, just kept driving, humming some old country song. My hands clenched into fists on my lap. I could have borrowed his phone, called Chloe, demanded answers. But what would she say? It was a joke, babe. Don't be so sensitive. I'd heard it all before. Every time I complained about her friends, she'd roll her eyes and tell me I didn't get their humor. Maybe I didn't, maybe I never would, but standing there alone, abandoned like some stray dog, I realized something. They didn't get me either. And Chloe, she'd picked them over me, again and again. The trucker dropped me off at a crossroads, pointing me toward Grand Junction, the nearest town. "Good luck, man," he said, tipping his cap. I nodded, my throat tight, and started walking. My shoes scuffed the dirt, the sun beating down on my head. No phone, no money, no plan, just me and the open road. Part of me wanted to turn back, to beg someone at the gas station to call her, to fix this. But another part, a louder part, kept pushing me forward. I was done being the punchline, done being the guy they laughed at. Chloe and her friends thought they'd won, thought they'd broken me. But as I trudged toward Grand Junction, a strange calm settled over me. They hadn't broken me, they'd set me free. I didn't know what was waiting for me in that town. I didn't know how I'd eat, where I'd sleep, or how I'd get by with nothing. But for the first time in years, I wasn't scared of what Chloe would think. I wasn't worried about her friend's next move. I was alone, yeah, but I wasn't helpless. The road stretched out ahead, endless and empty, and I kept walking. They'd left me behind, but maybe that was the best thing they could have done. Maybe this was my chance to figure out who I was without her, without them. By the time the sun started dipping low, turning the sky orange, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going back, not to Chloe, not to that life. Whatever came next, it was mine to build. A new beginning. I stood at the dusty crossroads where the trucker had dropped me off, the Colorado wind kicking up little swirls of dirt around my feet. Grand Junction was somewhere ahead, but I didn't have a map, a phone, or a dime to my name. Just the clothes on my back and a head full of spinning thoughts. Chloe and her friends had left me high and dry, and part of me still wanted to find a way to call her, to to hear her voice, to demand she turn the car around. But then I remembered how she'd laughed when Stephanie accidentally knocked my beer over at the lake house, how she shrugged when I asked her to stick up for me. 5 years of that, 5 years of feeling like a guest in my own marriage. No, I wasn't calling her, not this time. I started walking toward town, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. The sun was still high, baking the ground, and sweat soaked through my shirt. I didn't know how far Grand Junction was, miles, probably, but I didn't care. Every step felt like a choice, like I was leaving her behind, one footprint at a time. My mind kept drifting back to the gas station, to the moment I stepped out of that grimy bathroom and saw nothing but empty pavement. They'd planned it, hadn't they? Chloe, Stephanie, Ella, Lauren, all giggling in the car as they peeled out, thinking it'd be hilarious to ditch me. I could almost hear Chloe saying, "He'll figure it out. He always does." Well, I was figuring it out now, just not the way she expected. A pickup truck rumbled by, and I stuck out my thumb, hoping for a lift. The driver, a guy with a scruffy beard and a faded flannel shirt, slowed down and leaned out the window. "Need a ride?" he asked, eyeing me like he wasn't sure if I was trouble. "Yeah, heading to Grand Junction," I said, keeping my voice steady. He nodded. "Hop in, I'm going that way." I climbed into the passenger seat, grateful for the break. The cab smelled like oil and cigarettes, but it beat walking. "What's your story?" he asked as we rolled down the highway. I hesitated, then shrugged. "Got left behind by some people I thought I could trust." He grunted, like he'd heard that one before. "Happens more than you'd think out here." He dropped me off on the edge of Grand Junction, near a cluster of low buildings and a blinking traffic light. "Take care, man," he said, and drove off. I stood there, taking it in, a small town with a mix of old brick storefronts and newer chain stores, people going about their day like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong for me. No wallet, no ID, no way to prove who I was. I needed help, and fast. I spotted a sign for a homeless shelter a few blocks down, a plain building with a cross painted on the side. My stomach twisted at the thought, me, in a shelter? But what choice did I have? Inside, it was dim and smelled like bleach and stale coffee. A guy behind the counter looked up. Roy, his name tag said. He was older, maybe 50, with a shaved head and a no-nonsense stare. "You lost, or just broke?" he asked, sizing me up. "Both," I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. "Got ditched out on the highway. No money, no phone, nothing." Roy didn't blink. "Happens. You got a name?" "Yeah, Mike," I said, figuring it was easier to stick to the truth for now. He handed me a clipboard with a form. "Fill this out. We'll get you a bed for the night. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." That night, I lay on a cot in a room full of snoring strangers, staring at the ceiling. My mind wouldn't shut off. Chloe's face kept popping up, her voice, her laugh. I wanted to hate her, but part of me still ached for her to show up, to say it was all a mistake. But Roy's words stuck with me. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." He didn't mess around. The next morning, he sat me down with a cup of weak coffee and a plan. "You need ID to do anything, job, bank, whatever. Takes time, but we'll start the process. Meantime, you need cash." I nodded, feeling useless. "Anywhere hiring?" Roy smirked. "There's a diner down the street. Owner's a tough old broad named Jackie. Tell her I sent you." The diner was a squat little place called Jackie's, with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. Jackie was behind the counter. A wiry woman in her 60s with tattoos snaking up her arms and a voice like gravel. "Roy says you need work," she said, not even looking up from wiping the counter. "Yeah, I do," I replied, shifting on my feet. "Anything you got?" She squinted at me, like she was trying to see through me. "Dishwasher quit yesterday. Pays crap, hours are long. You steal from me, you're dead. Start now." I blinked, caught off guard, but nodded. "Okay, I'm in." She tossed me an apron, and just like that, I was scrubbing plates in the back, hot water soaking my hands. It wasn't much, but it was something mine. No Chloe, no friends laughing at me. Just me and a stack of greasy dishes. Roy checked in later that week, helping me file for a replacement ID. "You're doing all right, Mike," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. I wasn't so sure, but I kept going. The shelter became my home, Jackie's diner, my lifeline. I didn't call Chloe, didn't even try. Every night, I fell asleep exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. I was starting over from nothing, and it felt like maybe, just maybe, I could make it work. Moving on. It had been a couple of weeks since Chloe and her friends ditched me at that gas station, and I was still getting used to this new life. Scrubbing dishes at Jackie's diner, sleeping on a borrowed bed, wearing clothes from a donation bin. My hands were raw from the hot water and soap, but I didn't mind. It kept me busy, kept my mind off her. Roy had been a rock, helping me navigate the mess of getting a replacement ID. Takes time, he'd said, handing me a stack of forms. But you'll get there. I nodded, grateful for his gruff kindness, and kept pushing forward. The diner was my world now. Jackie didn't mess around. She'd bark orders from the counter, her sharp eyes catching every mistake. Move faster, Mike, we ain't got all day. She'd yell, but there was no real venom in it. I worked double shifts whenever I could, piling up cash in a little envelope I stashed under my cot. My first paycheck wasn't much, but it was enough to buy a cheap prepaid phone from the gas station down the street. I held it in my hands, the plastic still shiny, and felt a rush of something like pride. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, bought with my own money, not Chloe's, not anyone else's. I didn't need her anymore. Then the calls started. The calls. I'd only had the phone a day when it buzzed in my pocket while I was elbow deep in suds. I wiped my hands on my apron and pulled it out. Chloe's number flashed on the screen. My stomach dropped. I let it ring, watching it like it might bite me, until it went to voicemail. A minute later, the notification popped up. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. Her voice came through, soft and shaky, like she'd been practicing what to say. Mike, where are you? We waited for you. It was just a joke. We're so worried. Please call me back. I stood there, staring at the sink, the water still running. Worried? They'd left me in the middle of nowhere with nothing. If they'd waited, they'd have come back by now. The phone buzzed again. Stephanie this time. I hit play on her voicemail, and her tone was totally different, all smug and casual. Come on, dude, you have to admit it was hilarious. Call us back, all right? Hilarious. I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles went white. That's what I was to them. A punchline. A story to laugh about over drinks at the lake house. More calls came after that, a flood of them. Chloe again, then Lauren, then Stephanie, piling up with texts and voicemails. We miss you. Where'd you go? This isn't funny anymore. I scrolled through them all, my chest tight, my head spinning. Chloe's words kept echoing, fake concern, fake tears. She didn't care. None of them did. I sat on my cot that night, the shelter quiet except for the creak of springs and the hum of the heater. The phone glowed in my hand, their messages lighting up the screen. I listened to Chloe's first one again, then Stephanie's, then one from Lauren that was just her giggling before it cut off. My thumb hovered over the call button. Part of me wanted to dial Chloe, to scream at her, to ask why she'd done this. But what would it change? She'd just laugh it off or cry and make me feel guilty, like she always did. I'd spent years swallowing their crap, smiling through it because I thought that's what a good husband did. Not anymore. I went through the list, Chloe, Stephanie, Ella, Lauren, and blocked every single one. My fingers shook a little as I did it, but once it was done, the phone went silent. No more buzzing, no more lies. I leaned back against the wall, letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It felt like cutting a rope I'd been tangled in for years. They couldn't reach me now. They didn't get to decide how this ended. I did. A new life. The next day, I went back to the diner like nothing had happened, plunging my hands into the dishwater, letting the heat burn away the last of their voices in my head. Jackie noticed something was off, though. You're quiet today, she said, tossing me a rag to wipe down the counter. Trouble? I shrugged, not wanting to get into it. Just sorting some stuff out. She snorted. Long as it don't mess with my kitchen, sort away. I smirked at that. She didn't care about my drama, just the job. It was refreshing. Roy checked in later, handing me a paper with a case number for my ID. Coming along, he said. You holding up? I nodded. Yeah, better than I thought. He clapped me on the shoulder and left me to it. By the end of the week, I'd saved enough to buy a second-hand jacket from the shelter's donation pile. Nothing fancy, but it kept the chill off. I walked back to my cot that night, the prepaid phone silent in my pocket, and felt lighter. Chloe and her friends were gone, cut out like a bad habit. I didn't need their apologies or their excuses. I had work, a bed, a plan. Small things, but they were mine. The ache was still there, sure, the sting of betrayal, but it was fading. Every dish I scrubbed, every dollar I tucked away, I was building something new, something they couldn't touch. And for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep without dreaming of her. Epilogue. Standing tall. It had been weeks since Chloe, Stephanie, and Ella walked into my diner, since I handed them that $73.50 check and watched them argue in the parking lot. I hadn't seen them since, not a call, not an email, not even a whisper on LinkedIn. They were gone, really gone this time, and I felt it, a quiet that settled deep, like a storm finally passing. Life rolled on. Sienna was grading papers at the table, the kids were chasing each other around the backyard, and the diners were humming with regulars. It was mine, all of it, and they couldn't touch it. I'd stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped waiting for the next knock. The chili bubbled on the stove, steam rising, and I tasted it. Needed more salt, maybe a kick of pepper. Sienna glanced up from her stack of tests, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Smells good," she said, smiling that small smile I loved. "Better be," I shot back, grinning, and she laughed, soft and easy. The kids burst in from outside, our son waving a muddy stick, our daughter yelling about a bug she'd found. "Both of you, wash up," I barked, pointing to the sink, and they groaned but obeyed, splashing water everywhere. It was chaos, loud and messy, but it was ours. Chloe's face, those tears she tried to sell me, faded a little more every day, replaced by this. Work was good too. I bounced between the 3 diners, flipping burgers, checking stock, joking with the waitresses. The regulars knew me now, old Tom with his coffee, the trucker who tipped big, the lady who always asked for extra napkins. They'd nod, say, "Hey, Mike," and I'd nod back, feeling like I belonged. Jackie stopped by the first diner one morning, her tattoos faded but her glare still sharp. "You didn't screw it up," she said, looking around, then clapped my shoulder and left. High praise from her. I laughed to myself, pouring coffee for a table, and thought about how far I'd come, from a gas station nobody to this. I didn't check on Chloe anymore, no fake social media accounts, no late night scrolls. I'd done that once, years back, seen her play the grieving widow, but now I didn't need to know. She was out there somewhere, living whatever life she'd made after her business tanked, her marriage crumbled. Stephanie and Ella too, maybe still mad, maybe still blaming her. It didn't matter. They'd come begging, and I'd shut the door. That $73.50 check was the last thing I'd ever give them, just enough to walk away, like they'd left me to do. I didn't feel bad, didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Sienna and I took the kids to the park that weekend, a crisp fall day with leaves crunching under our boots. Our son ran ahead, kicking a ball, while our daughter clung to my hand, pointing at every squirrel. Sienna walked beside me, her arm brushing mine, and we didn't say much, just watched, breathed, lived. I thought about Chloe for a second, her showing up, her voice cracking, and let it go. She couldn't take this from me, couldn't even come close. I'd built it all without her, despite her, and it was better than anything she'd ever offered. "You're quiet," Sienna said, nudging me. "Just happy," I replied, and she squeezed my hand, knowing I meant it. Back home, we ate the chili, too spicy, the kids complained, but they shoveled it down anyway. I sat at the table, watching them bicker over the last roll, Sienna rolling her eyes at their noise. This was it, the best revenge, if you could call it that. Not some big fight, not rubbing it in their faces, just living well, living real. Chloe wanted me to break, to crawl back, and I hadn't. I'd walked away from that gas station, from her, and kept going. Roy at the shelter, Jackie's diner, Sienna's laugh, these kids. Every step was mine, every piece earned. They'd lost, not because I'd beaten them, but because I'd stopped playing their game. The days kept rolling, school runs, diner shifts, quiet nights with Sienna on the couch. I didn't look back, didn't need to. Chloe was a memory, a shadow that couldn't reach me anymore. I'd see her sometimes in a flash, her smirk, her tears, but it didn't stick. I'd turn the radio up, flip a burger, hug my daughter, and she'd fade. The diners thrived, the kids grew. Sienna and I argued over dumb stuff like whose turn it was to mow the lawn. It was simple, messy, perfect. I'd wake up early, make coffee, stand in our kitchen looking out at the yard, and feel it, peace, deep and steady. One night, after the kids were in bed, I sat on the porch, a beer in my hand.